The time was 2:43 in the afternoon, September 14th, 1944. Somewhere in eastern France, a young corporal named Daniel Keller pressed his eye to a rifle scope and counted 80 German soldiers moving through the valley below. They were between 400 and 600 yards out, not running, not crouching, walking, rifles hanging from their shoulders, backs straight, moving like men on a Sunday stroll, like men who had already done the math and knew they were safe. And by every rule the U.S. Army had written, they were. Military doctrine at the time drew a hard line at 300 yards. Past that, the variables piled up too fast. Wind drift, bullet drop, target movement. You'd burn ammunition and hit nothing. So the rifles stayed quiet, and the Germans walked on, unhurried. They had no idea who was watching them. Keller had grown up far from any battlefield. 200 acres of dairy farm outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Rolling countryside, stone walls running between the fields, corn growing thick in the summer heat. And woodchucks. On a working dairy farm, woodchucks were a genuine threat. They tunneled through the pastures, leaving burrow holes hidden in the grass. A cow could step into one of those holes mid-stride and snap a leg clean. A cow with a broken leg doesn't recover. You lose the animal, and on a small farm, every animal counted. His father offered a simple solution: 25 cents for every woodchuck brought in. In 1930, that was enough to make a teenager pay attention. The problem was that woodchucks were not easy targets. They grazed at first light, and again near sunset, always within sprinting distance of their holes. The slightest sound, the slightest shadow, and they were gone underground. Most of the time, you got one chance, one shot, before it vanished. And a woodchuck's head, sitting out in a field 200 or 300 yards away, measured about 6 inches across. 6 inches, at distance, with one chance to make it count. His father set him up with a Winchester Model 70 in .220 Swift, a flat-shooting cartridge built for exactly this kind of work. Long range, minimal arc, clean hits. Every evening after chores, Keller climbed the hill behind the south pasture and waited. He'd glass the field, find the movement, range the distance, and fire. Then he'd open his notebook and write it down. Date, range, wind conditions, result. Not for bragging, just to learn, to see the patterns, to understand how a crosswind of a certain speed pushed the bullet left at 400 yards versus 500, to know when his breathing was off and when it was controlled, to track his errors and eliminate them one by one. By the time he was 18, he could put a round through a woodchuck's head at 400 yards with consistency. By his early 20s, that range had stretched to 500. Over 14 years he filled those notebooks, more than 600 kills. Average shot distance, 380 yards. His longest, 547 yards. He thought of it as farming. Just a different kind. He was 26 when Pearl Harbor changed everything. He enlisted in 1943 and reported to an Army rifle range where instructors ran the standard qualification. 200 yards, no trouble. 300 yards, same. When they asked if he had prior experience with firearms, he told them he'd hunted woodchucks since he was a boy, mostly at distances between 300 and 500 yards. The instructor told him that was not possible. Keller told him it was. They issued him a Springfield M1903-A4 with a uninertal telescopic sight and forwarded him to sniper school. There, the curriculum still capped effective range at 300 yards. When Keller asked the reasoning, his instructor walked through the variables: wind deflection, ballistic drop-over distance, unpredictable target movement. Past 300 yards, too much could go wrong. Keller had spent the better part of his life solving each one of those problems. He said so. The instructor looked at him for a moment, then said, "A woodchuck doesn't shoot back." Keller didn't have an answer for that. He kept it in the back of his mind. By September of 1944, the 28th Infantry Division had fought its way through the tight hedgerow country of Normandy and emerged into a different kind of landscape entirely. Eastern France opened up. Wide valleys, broad fields, long, unobstructed sight lines. The kind of terrain where a good rifleman could do things that weren't possible in close country. On the afternoon of September 14th, Keller's company held a ridge overlooking one of those valleys. The ground below had been harvested recently, flat, mostly open, with a stone wall running across the middle and a cluster of farm buildings beyond it. The Germans wanted those buildings. 80 of them began crossing the valley floor at around 2:30. Loose formation, deliberate pace. From those buildings they could put fire directly onto the American ridge and make the position untenable. It was a straightforward tactical move, and they were executing it calmly. They were 400 to 600 yards from where Keller was watching. His lieutenant had binoculars pressed to his eyes. He'd already called for artillery, but the guns were 20 minutes out. 20 minutes was enough time for 80 soldiers to cover that ground and disappear into solid cover. Once they were in the buildings, getting them out would cost blood. He lowered the binoculars and asked if anyone could reach those men at that range. Keller said he could. The lieutenant turned and looked at him. 400 yards minimum. You cannot hit a man at 400 yards with a rifle. Keller said he'd been doing it since he was a boy, on smaller targets. The lieutenant said, "Show me." Keller found a position behind the stone wall at the ridge's edge. He picked the lead soldier, 480 yards out, moving at a steady walk. He watched the valley grass for a moment, reading the wind. Light, left to right. He made his adjustments, drew a slow breath, aimed slightly upwind of the man, and pressed the trigger. The soldier went down. The column kept moving. They assumed he'd fallen. Lost his footing, maybe. At that range, the sound of the shot arrived faint and directionless, if it arrived at all. There was no visible source. Nothing about their doctrine told them a rifleman could reach them here. Keller cycled the bolt and found the next man. 460 yards. Same wind. He fired. That man dropped too. The column stopped. 2 soldiers down, no visible shooter, no incoming fire from any direction they could identify. They stood in the open field and looked around, trying to make sense of it. Their doctrine said they were out of range. They started walking again. Over the next 6 minutes, Keller fired 7 more times. 7 more men went down. 9 total, all at over 400 yards, and the Germans still couldn't place where the fire was coming from. The remaining 71 broke into a run toward the stone wall in the center of the valley. They made it, but that wall put them at 420 yards, still well within Keller's capability. They returned fire anyway, sending rounds from their Kar 98K rifles toward the American ridge. Every shot fell 100 yards short. Keller settled in and waited. This part he knew. On the farm, when an animal ducked into cover, it didn't stay hidden forever. Curiosity, or the need to confirm the threat was gone, always brought it back up. You just had to be patient. A little under 2 minutes later, a helmeted head rose above the wall. Keller fired. 10. 3 minutes after that, another head appeared, cautious and slow. 11. The Germans held their position for 15 minutes. Then a group of 20 broke from the wall and ran hard toward the farm buildings. 200 yards of open ground, maybe 20 seconds exposed if they were fast. Keller fired 6 times in those 20 seconds. 5 of the 20 went down. The other 15 reached the buildings. Now the Germans were divided. 15 sheltering inside the farm at 380 yards. 56 still behind the wall at 420. Both groups effectively trapped. Neither could advance into the open. Neither could fall back without crossing the same exposed ground. One man had the whole field locked down. At 3:15, 10 soldiers made a different decision. They ran, backward, toward their own lines, trying to get out of the valley entirely. A retreat. Keller watched them through his scope. They were moving fast, range opening up. 420, then 450, then 480 yards, and still running. He thought about what his father used to say about shooting running woodchucks. You don't chase the target with your aim. You get ahead of it. You put the bullet where the animal is going to be, and you let them run into it. He picked the last man in the group, calculated the lead, and fired. 490 yards. The soldier went down in mid-stride. He cycled the bolt, took the next one, 510 yards. That one fell too. The other 8 made it back to their ridge. The artillery began arriving at 3:30. Shells started landing on the farm buildings and along the wall. Under that pressure, whatever discipline remained collapsed. All of them, those in the buildings, those still behind the wall, broke and ran for the far ridge in the open. Keller fired 11 more times. 8 more men fell. Ranges ran from 440 yards to 582. His longest shot of the afternoon. A soldier running at full speed. 4 feet of lead built into the aim, and the bullet found him in the middle of a stride. By 4 o'clock, the valley was empty and quiet. 34 German soldiers were dead. All killed by one rifle, operated by one man. At distances the army had officially deemed beyond the reach of aimed fire. The 46 survivors made it back to the far ridge. They did not attempt to cross the valley again. When the lieutenant's report reached division headquarters, it was met with skepticism. An officer was dispatched to interview the corporal directly. He asked Keller to explain how he'd made those shots. Keller walked him through it the same way he would have explained it to anyone back home. Read the wind off the grass. Estimate the range using whatever landmarks are available. Steady the breath. Don't jerk the trigger. Press it. For a moving target, work out where it's going to be and fire there. Nothing complicated about it, he said. He'd done it a few thousand times. The officer had him demonstrate on targets set at 400 and 500 yards. Keller put the first shot through both targets. The officer's written report concluded that Corporal Keller demonstrated extraordinary long-range shooting capability, developed through years of practical experience hunting small game at extended distances. Through the autumn of 1944, Keller kept working as a sniper. His engagements eventually stretched to 650 yards. By the end of the year, his confirmed kill total stood at 89. His average engagement range throughout the war, 430 yards. The Army took notice. In the years following the war, planners and trainers went back through his records and interviews and revised their doctrine accordingly. The accepted effective range for a skilled marksman was extended from 300 to 500 yards. Recruitment materials began specifically mentioning varmint hunting, the shooting of small, wary animals at distance, as ideal preparation for a sniper. What Keller had learned watching fields at dusk in Pennsylvania translated almost exactly to what the job required in France. He came home in 1946. He went back to the farm, went back to the hill behind the south pasture, went back to waiting for woodchucks to come out in the evening light. When people around Lancaster asked what he'd done in the war, he told them he was infantry. They would nod and let it go, the way people did then with men who'd come back quiet. He opened a new notebook. Date, range, wind, result. Same as always. Daniel Keller worked that farm for the rest of his life. He died in the spring of 1998, 82 years old, of a heart attack. He'd been outside, doing what he always did. The local paper noted that he had served in the Second World War. No details beyond that. After the funeral, when his children went through his things, they found the notebooks. 2 of them. The older one started in the early 1930s, a teenager's careful handwriting, recording woodchuck kills on the family farm. Date, range, conditions, result. The other covered the months he spent as a sniper in Europe. Same handwriting, same format, same clinical columns of information. Not a single sentence about what any of it felt like. Just data. His rifle, the Springfield he'd carried through France, eventually found its way into a private collection. The scope is still attached. The stock still fits the shoulder the same way it did in 1944. And cut into the wood in small, careful marks are 89 notches. 1 for each confirmed kill. Every one of them at a range the Army once said was impossible. The man who made those shots learned them on a hillside in Pennsylvania, waiting in the long summer evenings for a 6-inch head to emerge from the grass. He never considered himself exceptional. The way he saw it, once you could reliably hit something that small, at that distance, in variable wind, everything else was just a matter of scale. A woodchuck's head is 6 inches wide. A soldier's helmet runs closer to 7.